But yeah, Ryan, if nothing else, these introductions to our protagonist, if they teach us nothing else, it's that this is going to be an action film through and through, though there are also these other elements of it, right? But it's first and foremost an action film.
Right.
So that's kind of what I wanted to ask you as well, is obviously going to be a lot to talk about here, but what was your response to all the various action scenes and how large they were, and maybe even some of your favorite ones?
So I actually did some research on this because, as always on this show, the task at hand, I think, for us is not to just say, oh, I liked it or didn't like it, but why?
Yeah.
And ask ourselves, do some soul searching on why. Like, what makes this different from, some of the other action scenes that we see throughout cinema history, and what made this stand out? Why was I so emotionally attached? And so I did some research on this, and apparently Rajamouli treats his action sequences like short films. They all have very often 3-act structures. So you'll oftentimes will get a premise set up of what is he after? What's the MacGuffin that they're after? So for example, on the bridge sequence that we're going to get to here shortly,
I was thinking about that right now.
They're going to save the child. So you've got a tangible MacGuffin of what they're after. You've got a bit of a all is lost moment at the end of an act 2, where it's like, everything looks like shit. You get some redemption, you get character turns and stuff like that. So, he puts these little emotional beats throughout the action sequences. So it's not just a foray of fists and blood. You're actually watching things happen narratively that are impacting your character. You get those all is lost moments. And it's like, every one of these action scenes have that when you really start to break it down narratively, which is really interesting. It allows you to, again, be emotionally invested in what's happening versus just watching something from the outside looking in, this fist of fury thing. I mean, even in the opening sequence that you mentioned earlier about the hordes of people that were jumping on our character, and he had to fight his way out. He's going after a guy that threw a rock and broke a picture, I guess, of the prime minister or something like that. And he's like, go get that man, arrest that man. So now that man now becomes the MacGuffin. And we're shown throughout that action sequence, he didn't just jump in there to beat some ass. He's going to get that guy and pull him in for justice. So, throughout that.
Well, also specifically because he wants to be promoted to special officer.
Correct.
That's his whole motivation.
Right.
That's his
we
MacGuffin
find that out later.
This entire thing. Yeah.
Right. But, just that there's, purpose and emotional beats and stuff like that intertwined throughout the action sequence. And then, with the score and stuff like that. Also, again, the size and scope of it all. So again, going back to that opening sequence of the dog pile scene in the beginning, he showed several wide shots. I mentioned this earlier, almost like it was shot with a drone of the crowd. So you could see how, big of a pile this guy was in. And they shot that in segments with plates. So they would shoot them 100 people at a time for this slice of the screen frame, and then move everybody over and shoot it again, and move everybody over and shoot it again, so that
makes sense.
They would enhance it with CGI, like the Battle of Helm's Deep from the Two Towers. But at its core, those are all real people milling about. And so it gives you more of a realistic, grounded view of what this guy is in the middle of. It doesn't feel so fake and computer generated. Now, there's tons of CG in this movie, of course. CGI tiger, CGI, lots of things, lots of fire. But again, they tried to shoot practical and miniatures as much as humanly possible. If you go online, there's several online featurettes that kind of showcase that, like the train coming over the bridge and all of that. They shot all that in miniature or full-size miniature scale or whatever. It's a very large train, but obviously shrunken down a little bit. But yeah, it gives you more of a grounded, tangible feel for it. So it doesn't feel so fake.
Yeah. And, I think that when you're talking about the action sequences, that's, one of the huge selling features of this film, right? And it fits in because this is just a big movie, right? Everything here is big.
Sure.
Big set pieces.
Right.
Big dudes, big crowds, big explosions, big dance sequences, big everything, right? It's like the Texas of Indian films. Everything is bigger, right?
Yes. It's how can I crank this to 11? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, And I love both of the character introductions. And again, the scene where they meet saving the kid and, they go over the side of the bridge and embrace arms together and introduce each other, right? Like it's all even, the breaking into the party, right? Where you mentioned it, they unleash all the animals and like everything's just massive chaos, right? Which, by the way, one of my favorite shots or series of shots is in that fight. It's to your point earlier when they're doing the fire and water, juxtaposition. Yeah. Right. And they show Raju, and he's got like all these flames around him and everything, and he's advancing. And then they show Komaram, and he's got like the fountain has like been basically destroyed, but all of like the hoses are sort of like waving around back and forth with like water spurting everywhere around,
almost like a hydra or something. I think they even have their 100%. Fountain facades at the end, like dragon facades or something like that. So they're got their water breathing dragons or something. It's cool.
Yeah, so that was where that theme sort of presented itself, as well as other areas. But I think, in mentioning my two favorite scenes, action scenes specifically, it'd probably be those two. It'd be the scene where they save the kid and they introduce. Also, just because, again, it's so adorable, the bromance that they have immediately after that culminates from that initial scene. That obviously carries throughout the entire film, is a large part of the charm. And then, just that whole sequence with the animals unleashed and... Again, the fire versus water aspects. Also, like, him going full, like, God of War Kratos with this chain and, like, grabbing concrete pillars and, like, ripping them out of the ground and chucking them at Raju, dude. Right. Like, again, like, I've talked about it before, right? Like, for all of the analysis that we do and for all of, like, the deep dives and what was this metaphor and what is the filmmaker saying and all of this, like, there's also just these films that have elements that speak to the 14-year-old boy in us. Right. Who loves giant robots or, banging the crap out of giant buildings and destroying them in huge epic fights that are like way larger than life that could never really exist, right? Like these things.
Anything is possible in this movie.
Cheesy to a lot of people, sure. But like, I think, for people like us that can sort of appreciate all manner of film, again, this is the, big Spielberg, Hollywood, Michael Bay epic type of thing, but coming to you straight from India, where they also have a very deep compassion and very deep sense of moral justice and all of that. And so you get this nice stew of all these different ingredients that, if you tried to make it back home, like you couldn't do it, right? You would mess it up because you don't understand how these things work together, these ingredients, right? But then, you go to India, you get some homemade curry over there and it's like, oh, wow, this is really good. You guys actually know what to do with these ingredients. Whereas like, this is foreign to me, so I don't, right?
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a cultural thing, but they are they're not afraid to be a little silly at times too. Like the prison break action sequences when the guy's doing a straight chicken fight on the dude's shoulders and he's got the two rifles because his legs don't work. He's been brutally beaten at this point. Bima's like get on my shoulders, and he's just, doing a full chicken fight Rambo prison escape. And they're like swapping guns, so sometimes Bima has the gun. So, Raja could like hold on to the, tree and swing across the wall, and Bima's shooting people. And then he like chucks the guns up to him so he can like bust a door open. Fucking awesome, dude. It's like, you're absolutely right. I felt like a little kid playing with my action figures, with my G.I. Joes, and I'm making him do like unrealistic, like jumps off the bed and then he jumps in his vehicle and pieces out, totally, little kid aggro, adrenaline rush that I get watching this. But again, grounded in a lot of vibrant color. I mean, to your point, that fire and water scene, beautiful, oversaturated orange lighting on everything. And then you cut to the water and it's all these blue, cool teals. And it's just really gorgeous to watch in the midst of all this hyper violent, action. And then, when they're in the jungle and stuff like the tiger scene, it's all this hyper saturated green. It feels very lush. But then when you're back in Delhi, like where the mob scene is in the opening, very arid and dry and orange, like you're almost like you're thirsty. You're like, oh, my mouth is so parched. But then you're in the lush, you're the next scene, you're in the lush jungle and you're like, like Mowgli and Baloo the bear just going down the river. Everything's fine, So visually speaking, I think that, they whooped ass on this. They were able to tell a lot narratively just by the colors they were using on the color wheel.
Yeah, absolutely. So narratively, shortly thereafter, we learn that Akhtar is posing as a mechanic, a very modest guy, while Raju is offered the prize of being promoted to special officer if he can find the person they're referring to as the shepherd who is looking for the young girl, Molly, that they have kidnapped, or Mally. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce that, but he poses as a revolutionary to gain some information, ends up leading him to the town where Akhtar is hiding. And that's where we get the sequence where the train ends up exploding on this raised track. It surrounds this kid who's below on the water. Raju waves to him from the bridge to get his attention. Akhtar, returns it. He's like, "Hey, buddy, yeah, I got you." Jumps on his motorcycle, meets him, and that's where the two devise this plan to save the boy. And they tie themselves to the ropes. They both book it the other way, one on his motorcycle, the other on his horse, jump over the side of the freeway. And then the cool thing is, to your point, because these action sequences are like little stories, I did actually go back on YouTube and watch this sequence again just to brush up for this review. And yeah, there was a couple little things I noticed, like when Raju is sweeping down and he has the flag, he like unfurls it and like drags it on the water,
right?
So that when he like throws it to Beam and Beam wraps himself in it to go through the flames, like that's where that protection is coming from, right? Because it's been like soaked in water. And there's just a little touch, at first I thought it was just like the waving the flag for a visual element, right? Because it just looks cool, like with him, going forward and in the background. But yeah, it actually has like a reason for doing that aside from just looking cool. And so there's a lot of little elements like that you'll notice in these action scenes as you sort of go back and rewatch them. So the fact that you're saying that he treats them like these little sort of 3-act mini stories, it makes perfect sense,
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. He busts out of that flame, Bima does, like Michael Jackson from the Black or White video. I don't know if you remember that, but he just like comes out like, ready to go. I was like, whoa, he's back, baby.